We're on a quest to find the best method book series for older beginners. We're talking the students who come to us who are above age 10, maybe 12 and up, who need a solid foundation to their piano journey. The next up on our list is Piano Safari for the older student. I ordered every single book in this series, looked them over for months, and used them with my own students. Let's find out if this is a series that piano teachers have been searching for. Hey, if we haven't met before, I am Phoenix, and I'm the Tattooed Piano Teacher. This video right here is going to focus on the Piano Safari series designed for ages 12 and up. If you're more interested in finding a method series for your average age beginners, in other words, ages 6 through 10, let's say, then you might want to check out my original review of the Core Piano Safari series. But if you're here for those older beginners that come to your studio ready to learn, then let's dive into the Piano Safari for the older student. As always in my piano method reviews, we're going to be using my 10 categories for comparison. We're going to start with the levels so we can see the overall path that a student would take in this series, and then we'll dive into pacing and all the other categories. There are 3 levels in the Piano Safari Older Beginner series, and they are comprehensive. There's level 1, level 2, and level 3. In each level, there are 2 main core books that are all inclusive. Each level has a repertoire and technique book. This will be the main lesson book, and a complementary sight reading and theory book. How far will this series take students? By the time they are finished with the older beginner level 3, they will be at an early intermediate level. This is the same as the regular Piano Safari series. It just gets there faster. However, a quick note that the level 3 in the older beginner series does take the student into a few extra more challenging pieces than where the original Piano Safari series cuts off. Where would the student go next after completing this entire series? Well, because they'll be approaching into that intermediate level, they can really go in any direction they want. The Piano Safari authors do have a series called The Advancing Pianist, and that has a level 1 and a level 2. However, note that that is just sight reading and technique, not literature books. Although there are only 3 levels, this really is truly going to take a student from very beginner all the way to early intermediate. So it does fill the shoes of a normal core method book series, level 1 through 5, let's say. Now that you understand how the book layout and the levels work, let's talk about the pacing as they move through these 3 levels. Pacing just describes how quickly the songs get more challenging, how quickly the new theory and technique concepts are introduced to students along their journey. When these books came in the mail, I immediately grabbed that level 1 because if you watch my Faber Piano Adventures Accelerated review, you know that I'm not too thrilled about how that book series starts a beginner's journey at the beginning of level 1. So it's like the most important thing here is how does it start in level 1? So I excitedly opened up the level 1 repertoire and technique book and paged through those first few pages. Honestly, at first I was confused and a little disappointed. I thought what I know about the Piano Safari series and how it starts with teaching pieces by rote and the amazing compositions that these authors make, I thought surely the Piano Safari for the older student is going to get these older beginners playing like really cool music right away. And that wasn't exactly the case. So my expectations were quite high for the first few pages of this level 1, and I was a little disappointed. However, the more I looked through the book, the more I kind of understood where the method was going. Like many method books for teens and adults, this does start with some very dry instructional pages. Here's some pictures of how to sit at the piano. Here's what a quarter note is. Here are the notes on the piano, and they're not actually playing any songs until you get several pages into the book. And then the first couple songs that they're playing are like, play every white key, play the black keys. So I just was expecting something a little bit different, maybe a little twist on how those first couple lessons with our older beginners was going to go. I didn't really find that in this book. But I wasn't about to give up on this entire series just because I was a little disappointed with the first pages of level 1. So I kept looking through and I kept looking through trying to get that overall big picture of how this journey is going to go for the student over a few years' time. And what I noticed was the author's attempt to super balance all of these elements. And that's what was showing up in the beginning of level 1, was the beginning of this balance where they're really trying to include so many different elements into this method. And that I do appreciate. What do I mean by balancing different elements? I mean including rote learning. So learning by ear, where the teacher is demonstrating and the student is copying. Reading, solid reading. And we'll talk about that more in notation. Technique is huge. Theory is included as well, even in the lesson book. And then yes, there are cool sounding songs that are thrown in there as well. We get those time-tested classics, those classic melodies like Ode to Joy that every beginner piano player has to play, mixed in with some modern compositions that sound a little more new agey and jazzy and are going to appeal to this demographic of piano student. And all of that mixed with some exposure to jazz and improvisation assignments as well. So although I might have not designed the first few pages of level 1 the same way that these authors did, as I look over the student's whole journey, I can see how they're going to get a good mix of a lot of different activities. They're not going to have any holes in their learning as they move through the levels. And after a few typical older beginner starter dry pages, they do get a little bit of that piano safari magic. We'll talk about that more in song selection. In conclusion, the overall pacing of the Piano Safari method, say in comparison to the Faber Piano Adventures Accelerated series, is pretty similar, but it does get students into playing more advanced techniques right away because it's a very technique-heavy method. And because of its unique approach to note reading, notes are slow to be introduced at the start of the journey, but if all goes well, this student will become an extremely solid note reader by the time they get to the end of this series. So I would say pacing is average to fast, but with some balanced breaks in the forward motion. Let's put it that way. Okay, I've talked way too much about pacing. Let's move on to the positions, as in the hand positions. Piano Safari and the Piano Safari for the older student are the same in that there are no hand positions introduced, talked about, shown, no hand positions whatsoever. Students are given at the beginning a picture of the keys where they put one finger from the right hand and one finger for the left hand. The rest they figure out from there. They are reading by patterns and intervals. They are not locked into a position at any point in time. It's only in level 2 that we start to talk about like the pentascales, the major pentascales. How does having no positions affect the learning process? Some teachers absolutely adore this. They don't want their students locked into a position. They don't want them thinking about 4 as F and associating that and locking that in to the point where they can't even move their hands to a new position. And while I totally hear that, I also have had students who their brain just needs the structure of the position, can't really function outside of the position. And for that reason, I would say that this might not be the best method for every single student blanket across the board. So just want to mention that. Let's move on to notation, which is also a unique approach in the Piano Safari method series. At the very beginning of the student's journey in level 1, there is a mix of rote pieces. So they are on the staff. However, the intention is that the teacher would teach it by ear, by demonstration, and that the student would be seeing the notes on the staff, but not actually reading them yet. So about half of that, and then about half of off-staff notation. So there are some white key and black key songs in off-staff notation, traditional finger number visually represented on the page like we're used to seeing. The staff is officially introduced on page 29 of level 1, and they are only taught 3 notes. These are their landmark notes. And throughout the entire book of level 1 until the very, very, very end, they are only told what those 3 notes are. It's the bass C, the middle C, and the treble G until the very end. Every song in level 1 will start with the right hand on one of these notes and the left hand on one of these notes. They'll all start with a C or a G, but it will be a different finger and a different, dare I say, position, although there are no official positions for every song. So they'll need to identify those landmark notes for their starting note, and then they are literally reading by step from there. And then once skips and thirds are introduced, then they're reading by skips as well. At the very end of level 1 on page 80, they are introduced to the rest of the staff. So they've had these 3 landmark notes plus seeing other notes on the staff and reading by pattern, not necessarily naming them as what their note names are. At the very end, they're shown, okay, here are all the notes on the staff. And then from there on out, they're expected to basically be able to read any note on the staff. So this is kind of a trust the process type of approach, much different than, say, like the Wonder Keys, which will introduce one new note and then drill that note until the student can recognize it blindfolded, and then we add another new note, or similar to the Faber, which uses the landmark notes, but also teaches what the other notes are called around it. But the Piano Safari is really all about recognizing patterns, learning by ear and sight together. Once the student is exposed to all the notes on the staff at the end of book 1, then in level 2, they are sort of expected to read all notes on the staff. The authors call this a intervallic reading approach. So that is reading by interval, reading by pattern, reading by distance from those landmark notes. While I don't love the landmark approach for young kids because I think that they think stepwise through the alphabet a little bit more. For older beginners, this could definitely be successful, as older beginners are more able to recognize that one landmark note they're looking for and then read by pattern from there. Let's talk about the theory book. Now, the theory books that came in the box with my lesson books were thick. Level 1 sight reading theory book is pretty thick, but it is staple bound. But the level 2 and 3 are actually spiral bound because they're so thick. Why so much theory? Are they going to be writing all these pages? No. Most of the sight reading and theory book is sight reading. So if you're familiar with Piano Safari or you've seen my other review, then you know that there are these sight reading cards that you can put in front of the student and work with them. Those same cards, or the content that's on those cards, is contained within the book. So there are a lot of those sight reading pages and a few writing pages. Once you get into level 3, then it's about half writing and half sight reading at that point. Overall, I do think that the theory books look pretty solid, although instead of being so heavy on the sight reading, which I understand is very important for intervallic reading in that approach, but I wish there was like a little more ear training, improv, other stuff worked into the theory book as well, and I wish there was more review. But if I was going to commit to this series, I would definitely include the sight reading and theory book alongside the repertoire and technique book. One other note about theory, level 3 does get quite advanced, and this is the same with the later level of the regular Piano Safari series. They get into analyzing chords, inversions, calling out chords by their letter name as well as their Roman numeral. So the analysis and harmonization gets pretty advanced in that, which I think is cool. I think chord knowledge is really important for the type of music that kids want to write these days. So I do like that about the level 3 in the theory book. Let's talk about technique, because I've already mentioned that this is a technique focused series. And I would say that as far as pacing goes, it's fairly average, but when it comes to technique, this is fast and furious, getting those students doing some pretty advanced techniques right away. One example of this is at the beginning of the level 1, so the beginning of the pianist's journey, they are moving from black keys to white keys very quickly, which we wouldn't normally ask a beginning student to do until a little bit later on. And I was surprised to see the overlapping or intuitive pedaling with lifts introduced right away. Like, this student hasn't even probably tried the pedal as far as even just pushing it down and holding it through a song, and they are expected to do the overlapping pedal. I'm guessing that this is a little bit of a rough start with this technical skill with the coordination of the foot, but I also know that students do love pedaling, so I wonder how this works out with different age students if they're able to do this overlapping pedal technique. There's even a songwriter right away that has the pedal simile instruction, like how are students supposed to intuitively pedal once a measure if they've just started playing piano? So you see my point that we are really throwing students into the world of technique right away, expecting a lot of them, and I bet they come through with it. Now, one of the reasons that they can do this is because of the rote pieces. So teaching by ear, you can ask students to do more than they're able to sight read on the staff. And then also that intervallic reading approach, they don't have to know the name of every note because they're reading by pattern and hearing sounds. So that allows that technique to be kind of up-leveled even at a beginning stage. So if you're curious how the new technique skills are rolled out, let me just give you a little rundown. In level 1, the technical skills that would be introduced will be firm fingertips and arm weight, no surprise there. But then we have the syncopated pedaling, which I was just talking about, is introduced on page 23. Students are exposed to non-legato and then legato articulation, the 3-note slur, and wrist rotation. In level 2, right away in the book, they get all major pentascales and triads, and later on in the book, they get all minor pentascales and triads. They're working on phrasing, and then later on, they're doing a one-handed scale in 1 and 2 octaves, as well as triad inversions and arpeggios. In book 3, they're going to start learning Hanon patterns. They're going to be doing 2 and 3 octave arpeggios. That's just one hand at a time, but still. Chord progressions and waltz bass patterns, broken chord accompaniments, and chromatic scales. All right, you've been peeking into some of the pages as I've been talking. We're going to talk about aesthetics next, and I will let you know what I think about the Piano Safari books for older students. Make sure you give this video a like if you enjoy my piano method reviews. That tells me, okay, Phoenix, you should make some more of these, and I plan to. Thank you for your support. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of the upcoming piano method reviews. So the aesthetics of the Piano Safari for the older student, on the interior, it's black and white. It's just the titles and the songs. There are no pictures. So if you watch the review of the regular Piano Safari, it's still black and white and it's still very simple, but there are some zoo animals, some safari themed things going on. Of course, it's this Piano Safari. Those are all taken away in the older student method. So you know how I feel about that. I like a little color. I like some pictures. I like some imaginative design on the pages, even as an adult, even as a teen, even as an older beginner. But the pages do look really clean and the fonts are very modern looking, I think. The engraving looks really nice. I feel like these books do look very professional when you open them up, actually inside and out. My one complaint about the beautiful exteriors is that we have the floppy spiral book again. I talked about this in the level 2 and level 3 of the regular Piano Safari. The spiral books flop over on my music stand personally, and so we always have to put something behind it. I wish it was a little more firm on the cover so that it would stand up nice and tall, but a very small complaint. And let's talk about a very important category, song selection. As you already know from the beginning of this video, I had high expectations because this is Piano Safari. I know these composers and they're wonderful, and I really wanted that beginning to start off with some real bangers, you know? And it kind of let me down a little bit. However, there is a song at the beginning of level 1 that I know is a student favorite, and that's I Like Coffee. I don't know if older beginner students are drinking coffee yet or not, but even in the little kid book, it's the I Like Coffee song. But this is the classic melody that everybody knows, that even the non-piano players are playing on their keyboards, and so I think that this would be a student favorite for most. I did think it was interesting at the beginning of level 1 that the first 2 like real songs that the student is playing are both very jazzy sounding. So that's cool. I mean, it's a nice like modern like major 7th chords. Most students would be drawn to that. However, I have had a few students who like really hate jazz, like they're not into it. And so the fact that there are like those 2 jazz songs right in a row might throw some students off and be like, what did I get myself into? I don't like the sound of these songs. But for most students, I'm sure it's fine. When we get to page 46 in level 1, here we finally get like the first real modern composition by the authors of this book. And and it's gorgeous. I know that this song would really capture students' imaginations and be like, this is the reason I'm playing piano. They have to wait till page 46 until they get that, but from then on out, there are those modern songs sprinkled in. I wish there was more of them, honestly, but I, again, can see how they're really trying to balance different genres, different aspects of the musical journey so that we get a well-rounded piano player by the time we're out of the Piano Safari series. So just as generalization, as far as the mix of songs in level 1, we get a nice mix of like those typical folk songs that everybody kind of plays at the beginning of their journey, dabbling of classical themes, just a few, and then a couple of modern pieces in level 1. So it's a pretty good variety. Oh, and a little jazz. In level 2 and then moving into level 3, it gets more classical and even more classical. So by the time you're to the end of book 3, it is very heavy on the classical with a few of those gorgeous modern compositions thrown in there. The modern compositions are either like a new agey type sound or more of a jazzy type sound. So hopefully there would be enough in that level 3 to appeal to students, even if they're not super into classical music, but it does get pretty heavy on the classical themes, classical etudes, and that sort of thing. So just a little warning there. Let's talk about pricing because these are not the cheapest books in the world. However, given how thick and comprehensive each book is, I don't think it would be a hard sell to get a family to purchase these books. So let's run down the prices. All 3 repertoire and technique books are $19 each. They are all 3 spiral bound. The accompanying sight reading and theory books are level 1 $14, level 2 $15, and level 3 $16 because they do get a little thicker as you go. The level 2 and level 3 are spiral bound. However, to save a little money, if you're planning on getting both level 1 books or both level 2 books, you can get a little bit of a deal, a few dollars off. So here are the prices to get the level 1 pack, the level 2 pack, and the level 3 pack. And it's just those 2 books in the pack. So you're saving, I think, $4. As far as availability goes, sorry, you're not going to be getting these on Amazon. The only place you can purchase these books is on Piano Safari's website. That does mean that there's not really ever any sales on them and you have to pay the shipping. So if you're planning on purchasing or using Piano Safari methods, you might want to plan ahead a little bit so you can make a bulk order. I do think that even though they're a little more expensive, they are worth the few extra dollars that you pay because they are very comprehensive and they cover a lot of material in each book. So the final question, have we found the Older Beginner series? I don't know. There are still a few things, especially about the very beginning of the level 1 beginner's journey that just have me questioning, maybe we should keep looking out there. So I am going to keep searching out there in the world for the best piano method series for older beginners. Let me know in the comments if this looks like the series for you or if you're going to keep looking as well. And I want to invite you to consider joining the channel as a member. With each piano review I do, I'm going to record extended videos. The extended videos will include behind the scenes clips of me teaching from the methods that I'm talking about with real students. You can see them in action. You'll get some lesson ideas. You'll hear about the mistakes I make and how not to make them with the new method books. And it'll hopefully help you prepare if you plan on using these methods or if you're still not sure if it's the one for you. I also plan on posting members only exclusive videos that are playthroughs so you can hear every single song in these books. All of that will be on the member side of this channel. But if you're watching this at the time that I'm posting it, it's still a work in progress. You'll know when this library is starting to build up when you see a join button. Once you see that button, you'll know that it's time to step up and join the community here. And once I review my next older beginner series, I will put that video right here for you. I hope to see you there or on another piano method review very soon. See you then.